La Asamblea General.
The General Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Félix Antoine Tshilombo Tshisekedi, President of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honour to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Félix Antoine Tshilombo Tshisekedi, President of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and I invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr.
President, as I address this august assembly, I would like to begin by congratulating Ambassador Tijani Mohamed Bande on his election as President of the 74th session of the UN General Assembly. I also congratulate the members of his bureau, and I would like to wish his team every success in discharging their important duties. I would also like to pay tribute to Mr. Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, for his tireless efforts to strengthen our organisation and to improve its role in finding solutions to the problems that challenge peace, security and prosperity around the world. Mr. President, the theme of this current session is galvanising multilateral efforts for poverty eradication, quality education, climate action and inclusion. It comes at a time that is particularly difficult for multilateralism. The whole of humanity is engaged with unprecedented motivation in meeting the 2030 Development Agenda. This agenda stipulates the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, the implementation of the Addis Ababa Action Agenda on Development Financing, and also the achievement of the objectives set in the Paris Climate Agreement. Inequalities and a feeling of exclusion are at the root of the main threats to peace, stability, and harmonious development. They feed the uncontrolled flows of migration of whole peoples searching for a better future. In the countries of the North and the South, they exacerbate xenophobia, they increase the strength of populist forces, and they feed the radicalisation of those who have been left behind. The tragic events in South Africa are the worst illustration of this. These movements fed by popular frustration that in some regions go as far as feeding terrorism hold hostage the political debate and prevent us of finding collective responses to the problems that affect us all. Mr. President, I affirm from this High Assembly that no country can face these challenges alone. Unity, solidarity, tolerance, and international cooperation are essential values reflected by our founding fathers in the Charter of our Universal Organisation. More than ever before, economic and social development and allowing the peoples of the planet to achieve their full potential are fundamental and inalienable rights. As leaders, we have an obligation to work tirelessly to guarantee these rights. For decades, our organisation has worked together to adapt to the new realities of a world in a constant state of change. To be better able to face development challenges in a globalised world, we advocate a holistic reform of the UN system, in particular of the Security Council and the agencies within the UN system. The process of Security Council reform should be completed and should take into account the joint African position stated in the Esselwini Consensus and in the Sirte Declaration. It is indeed unfair that Africa remains the only region in the world that does not have permanent representation on the Security Council, when in fact the major issues, be they demographic, social or environmental, for the whole planet are inextricably linked to Africa. We want a configuration of the Security Council that is fair and equitable, and that is more representative of the world's peoples in their diversity. Mr. President, commitments have been entered into at the highest level to create the world that we want by 2030. Nonetheless, almost 1 billion people still live in hunger, malnutrition, and extreme poverty, while 118 million people in a situation of extreme poverty are exposed to drought, flooding, and heat in Africa, and will be exposed to those problems until 2030. We cannot simply say that these global commitments will fail by 2030, especially given the very mixed results in Africa of the Millennium Development Goal campaign. The eradication of poverty and hunger is today an urgent issue. The Democratic Republic of the Congo can be part of the solution, with its 80 million hectares of arable land and its abundant water sources that are enough for more than 2 billion people. Access to high-quality education for all is the second subject of this current session. This challenges us particularly because the experience of development in the decades following our independence has reinforced our conviction that the greatest wealth is our wealth in human beings. For that reason, as early as 2011, we incorporated the idea behind the 2030 agenda of leaving no one behind. And we did this through the well-known commitment of my compatriots that was entitled "The People First of All." Therefore, the major social priorities of my mandate are defined as follows. Firstly, ensuring free primary education in the public education system as stipulated by our national constitution. This commitment has been effective since the beginning of the month across our national territory. In 1 year, it increases the expenditure on education from 8% to almost 20% of our state budget, bringing it close to the levels recommended by UNESCO. Secondly, promoting better coordination between education and the employment market through a strategy for technical and professional education that has been devised and implemented in partnership with the private sector. Thirdly, making progress towards universal health cover. We hope that by the end of next year, more than 8 million additional Congolese citizens will have access to an effective system of healthcare coverage. Furthermore, the Democratic Republic of the Congo has just outlined its national digital plan, and that plan will cover all areas of our national life. Furthermore, digitization of our economy will allow the country to make speedy progress in fighting corruption and various economic crimes. Mr. President, our democracies are becoming particularly demanding and impatient, and we need to find the ways to meet our ambitions. Therefore, I've initiated a large-scale, urgent community development program which will help to drive the solutions to socio-economic inequalities and to problems of land within different towns and territories. It will be a special multi-sectoral integrated program that I will personally be leading to allow the country to catch up in its implementation of the global development goals. This program will benefit from the strategic and financial support of all of our partners and from the United Nations Development Program. It aims to improve the population's access to basic social services, in particular through promoting small-sized rural hydroelectric plants, and the sites for these have already been identified, more than 700 sites indeed. The programme also aims to develop human capital and to strengthen connectivity between territories through rural pathways. Mr. President, humanity's socio-economic development to 2030 will either be sustainable or it will not happen at all. In this regard, the fate of all of us, rich or poor, is more connected than ever. Because of its natural resources and its demographic vitality, Africa has become the pivot of this sustainability. Within Africa, nature has made my country the custodian of 47% of the continent's forests, meaning that it has a major responsibility in helping our planet's survival. As I have already said time and again, it is an absolute necessity that we make sure that Africa has new sources of energy and new means of production that are compatible with environmental protection, and also we must reaffirm our inalienable right to development. We are resolutely committed to protecting our forests. However, the preservation of our natural heritage cannot be done at the detriment to our development. It is simply inconceivable that the forests of the Congo Basin, the best preserved forests in the world, receive only 1% of the available financing. It is imperative that all of the international financial architecture, including the International Monetary Fund, in its driving role in developing financing, better integrate environmental issues into their analysis of macroeconomic criteria and challenges as connected to the way it intervenes in different countries. As far as we are concerned, we recognise that the Democratic Republic of the Congo has a major role to play here. Therefore, my government has relaunched its dialogue with its main partners on environmental issues, in particular those within the framework of the Central African Forests Initiative. My government has responded to the call from the UN Secretary-General and has committed, through my person, to increasing its commitments within its nationally defined contribution and to maintaining close cooperation between the countries of the sub-region to speak with one voice on all the questions connected to protection of forests. My government has made the production of clean and renewable energy its main priority for our 5-year period to come. Making use of aggressive investment and an attractive policy for protecting these investments, we can move from 10% of electrification currently to 60% in the next 10 years. And while doing this, we can drastically reduce the use of wood as a source of heating. In creating our energy mix, we wish to strengthen the fight against deforestation, and my government has encouraged the development of domestic gas supplies in urban areas and in rural areas as well as suburban areas. We would like to be the place on this planet where the average kilowatt hour of electricity is the cheapest, thanks to our use of our capacity for more than 100,000 megawatts in hydroelectric production. We wish to have better control over the use of our forests and to extend our natural reserves and parks to increase our biomass and to protect our biodiversity. However, this can only be done with the effective implementation of an environmentally friendly industrial strategy concentrated around centres of production and consumption and that generates jobs for our young people. The average age of our population is 17.5. The population is therefore barely any older than Greta Thunberg and partly shares her concerns and her interests. But how can our young people involve themselves in the same fight if they have neither water nor light? I have also decided to gradually bring my country out of an archaic agricultural system that is unproductive and that destroys our forests. With this in mind, we're going to promote better management of forests that maximises our comparative advantage by privileging savanna zones. I intend to make environmental issues an omnipresent concern and a cross-cutting one, which will have an influence on all of our policies, strategies and development projects. Mr. President, at the time that I'm addressing you from this high rostrum for the first time, I have to recall the particular relationship between our organisation and my country. Firstly, this relationship gives rise to a spirit of thanks. Indeed, the Democratic Republic of the Congo has very often been at the centre of the United Nations concerns because of the number of crises it has been through since it achieved independence. Since the tragic death of the Secretary-General, Dag Hammarskjöld, via the many blue helmets who fell in combat, and then on to the heinous murder recently of UN experts Zaida Catalan and Michael Sharp, the United Nations, more than any other international organisation, has experienced in full the realities that millions of my compatriots live through. The United Nations and its many agencies have also deployed important financing to support the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I should therefore like to reiterate our gratitude to you on behalf of the Congolese people, who will never forget the support of our organisation. That being said, I cannot help but regret that the history of my country is so painfully connected to the United Nations. For 24 of our 59 years of independence, there has been a peacekeeping mission deployed in my country. despite this long presence, why have most of our hopes for peace and development been dashed? Beyond the choices taken and the responsibility that we must take domestically, we have to see the interests of Congo or Africa in connection with the interests of the rest of the world and the interests of others. What would have happened to Congo if Patrice Lumumba had not been assassinated? What would have become of my country if it had been allowed to learn its way in democracy in the post-war era without having been diverted by wars that came from outside? And without going too far back in our history, every day we face the shocks coming from interests that very often take advantage of the recurrent fragility of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Therefore, the greatest challenge that Congo faces at the moment is peace, security and stability. Since my investiture, I have been convinced of the absolute need for peace, and therefore we have worked without reserve to achieve this objective, taking into account the regional and international dimension. With this in mind, last July at the 39th summit of SADC in Dar es Salaam, I proposed that we create a regional coalition like the global counterterrorism coalition to eradicate the scourge of insecurity created by armed groups coming from either within or outside the country. Our security forces are fighting side by side with the support of MONUSCO to eradicate these forces that sow death and desolation among our populations. Some of these rebel movements, in particular the ADF-MTN, are carrying out terrorist attacks that are consistent with their allegiance with Daesh, which represents a new threat to my country and to the sub-region. As if conflicts and instability were not enough, these countries to the east of the DRC are also affected by an Ebola epidemic that has now lasted more than a year. The situation is very serious. Therefore, last May, I set up a technical cell that works under my supervision. It is made up of experts of international standing, and it is led by our compatriot, Professor Jean-Jacques Muyembe. It was he who identified the Ebola virus and whose research led to the discovery of MAB114, a therapeutic molecule that can be used to treat the illness. Our new response strategy is beginning to bear fruit, in particular in Goma, which is now safe from the virus. Even though much has been done, the epidemic still hasn't been eradicated. The strategy will be strengthened by the introduction of 5 new approved medications, besides the vaccine against the Ebola virus, which will allow us to completely eradicate the illness. I would like to take this opportunity to hail the solidarity that's been shown by our bilateral and multilateral partners, in particular the World Health Organization, the African Union, UNICEF, the World Food Programme, MONUSCO, and many others. In particular, turning now to the UN mission, in this period that will be decisive for its future in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, as it goes through a strategic review, I would like to reiterate the thanks of the Congolese people to the contributing countries for the human and material sacrifices they have made to date in favour of my country. I note a convergence of views with the Secretary-General on the urgent need to readapt MONUSCO's configuration to evolutions on the ground, concentrating yet further on capacities for operational intervention by UN forces side by side with the Democratic Republic of Congo's armed forces. In other words, the Democratic Republic of the Congo still needs MONUSCO, but we need a MONUSCO that is focused, that is well equipped, that is strong, and that has a properly adapted mandate, such as is the case with the Force Intervention Brigade that has already been able to derail the M23 movement. Mr. President, like other developing countries, the Democratic Republic of the Congo aspires to make great progress. We are convinced that our country, which because of its geopolitical situation is at the crossroads of the various economic groupings of Central Africa, Southern Africa and Eastern Africa, should be able to facilitate African integration as a driver for development and a bringer of peace between nations. This is why we supported the project for a continental free trade area, though we remain aware that this will be implemented on a step-by-step basis. This process will inevitably require harmonisation and the removal of customs barriers. With this vision in mind, the Democratic Republic of the Congo intends to accelerate the implementation of a programme developing infrastructure that would be up to the task of covering its 2.3 million square kilometres, connecting the country from east to west and north to south, and to facilitate the movement of goods and people, and to free up the agricultural potential of our provinces. Mr. President, today the Democratic Republic of the Congo is the site of almost 70% of the global reserves in ores that are strategically essential for the energy transition and digital transition that humanity is going through. We are not using these natural ore reserves as a source of monopolistic profit. Rather, my country proposes that it open up to the world by allowing the regulated exploitation of its minerals, while in exchange for support for industrialization and the production of batteries and components that have greater added value. The world needs cobalt, it needs coltan, and it needs lithium. We want industrial jobs, we need training, and we need development. Finally, the Democratic Republic of the Congo has 53% of the freshwater reserves in Africa. Sustainable management of this potential will also allow us to end the thirst of a quarter of the world's inhabitants. Mr. President, we are today living through a deep crisis in the international liberal order. The law of might is right can only reinforce frustrations and violence. By way of example, the recent attacks against petrol installations in Saudi Arabia make us fear the risk of an escalation in the situation around the Strait of Hormuz, which would paralyse the global economy. We must denounce any violent reaction to political problems that can be solved through dialogue and working together. Are we ready to define a new world order, a world order in which Africa and the Democratic Republic of the Congo would play the role that is rightful to them? I believe that a new path is possible. It will perhaps be the most difficult path, it might be the most complex one or the most demanding one, but this will allow us to get out of our silo thinking. Mr. President, my country, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, has just organised democratic and peaceful elections for the third time. It has had the fortune, for the first time in its history, to live through a peaceful and democratic transfer of power, when a number of observers had painted a grim picture, a pessimistic one indeed, of the outcome of these elections. This historic victory is above all a victory for the Congolese people. their intensive sacrifices over recent years have been rewarded by a peaceful electoral process. It's also the opportunity for us to thank the international community, in particular the countries of SADC, Kenya, Egypt, and the United States, who have tirelessly encouraged this giant leap taken by my country in the process of building the rule of law. Since my investiture, I have worked to consolidate our democratic gains by guaranteeing all rights and freedoms. Nobody is persecuted for their opinions. The Democratic Republic of the Congo no longer has prisoners of conscience. Nobody needs to emigrate to save their life or to preserve their security because of particular political convictions or associations. On gender issues, even if we have not yet achieved total gender parity, I'm pleased to say that we have made progress in the Democratic Republic of the Congo in all sectors. We have increased the rate of participation of women from 6% to 18%. The current government has therefore reached the highest level of participation by women in the history of the country. I have made gender issues one of my political priorities. Mr. President, at regional level, I have developed intensive diplomatic activity to restate my country's continued commitment to good neighbourly relations and in favour of peaceful coexistence, while respecting territorial integrity and the sovereignty of other nations. With this in mind, we as African leaders should give our continent a voice based on consensus and harmony, based on politics that are truly African. I should like to express my deep concern about what is happening in the Mediterranean, where many people trying to emigrate die every day in inhumane conditions. The waves of refugees and the horrific images that we have seen in recent years from the coast of Europe should challenge our consciences as leaders. Since the beginning of 2015, more than 500,000 migrants have tried to reach Europe across the Mediterranean, and more than 5,000 of them have died during the crossing. The seriousness of this catastrophe challenges us to find urgent and effective solutions. The Global Pact for Safe, Ordered and Regular Migration was adopted in Marrakesh in 2018. This is our response to the migration crisis. We have a duty to quickly draw up ambitious national initiatives to implement that agreement. But our best weapon is to work in favour of development, equality and stability around the world. I would like to take this opportunity, while speaking from this high rostrum, to demand the complete lifting of the sanctions that are still affecting Zimbabwe and have done since 2002. These sanctions are no longer justifiable, given that the country has opened a new chapter in its history and has shown itself ready to cooperate with the world. The maintenance of these sanctions is unfair. It makes the country less attractive to foreign investors, and it affects not only Zimbabwe, but the whole of the region. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, the absolute priority of my options is to offer a prospect of dignity to our populations, to promote the creation of jobs, in particular for young people, and to combat precarity and exclusion. This assembly that wishes to reduce inequalities and to build a world that is more inclusive might be the best way to drive these views. The challenge is enormous, but what makes us human is our capacity to find solutions, improbable even though those solutions might be, when those solutions are necessary. I thank you.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank His Excellency Félix Antoine Tshilombo Tshisekedi for the statement just made. May I request representatives to remain seated while we greet the Head of State.